Adrian Newey is furious, and that should terrify Aston Martin fans. For seconds per lap off the pace. 160 horsepower disappearing halfway down the straight. A hybrid system that overheats after just a few aggressive braking zones. And after preseason testing officially ended, leaked commission discussions revealed something even worse. The Honda engine cannot even recharge to its minimum electric target. This was supposed to be the ultimate super team. Newey's most extreme chassis ever built. Honda's full factory comeback. Fernando Alonso chasing one final shot at glory. Instead, the AMR26 spent more time in the garage than on track, with mechanics literally cutting holes into the bodywork just to stop the car from cooking itself. Strong for 100 meters. Then clipping. Then helpless. Honda has admitted their simulations did not match real track conditions. They are running 24-hour crisis tests in Japan. They are rushing a new battery specification before Australia. And now the question is explosive. Did Newey design a masterpiece around an engine that simply was not ready? Subscribe now, because what we are about to uncover could decide whether Aston Martin's revolution becomes a championship fairy tale, or the next catastrophic engine era collapse. Now let's slow this down, because once preseason testing ended, the anger inside Aston Martin was not about lap time. It was about shock. This was not a small calibration issue. This was not a case of being slightly off the pace. This was a hybrid system that failed at the most basic requirement of the 2026 regulations. Recharge under braking. Without harvesting, there is no deployment. Without deployment, there is no straight-line speed. And in this new era, nearly half of the car's performance depends on electrical energy. The pattern in Bahrain was brutally clear. The AMR26 would launch hard out of slow corners. The first 100 meters looked competitive. Then halfway down the straight, the power flattened. Extreme clipping. Rivals continued accelerating. The Aston simply stopped gaining speed. Why? Because the battery entered thermal protection. Under aggressive harvesting, the energy store overheated. The software cut recharge instantly to prevent catastrophic failure. No recharge meant no boost. And that is where the 160 horsepower deficit appeared. For seconds per lap. Confirmed by both drivers. Fernando Alonso did not sugarcoat it. He said he has never driven with less power. He made it clear this was not balance. Not setup. The car simply does not run. And that is what triggered Newey's fury. Because he designed the AMR26 around efficiency. Ultra-tight rear packaging. Minimal cooling margins. A size zero philosophy taken to the extreme. He trusted Honda's thermal projections. He trusted the integration numbers. Instead, the first real stress test exposed a fundamental mismatch. Honda has admitted their simulations in Japan did not match real track airflow conditions in Bahrain. That admission is enormous. In modern Formula 1, simulation accuracy is everything. If your dyno models cannot replicate track conditions, your validation process is broken. But Honda's internal position adds fuel to the fire. They argue the AMR26's ultra-compact bodywork suffocates the hybrid cooling system. Restricted airflow forces the control software into protective derating. In their words, the engine works if it can breathe. And that is the fracture. Newey believes he designed the chassis within agreed thermal limits. Honda believes the chassis exceeded safe margins. Two elite engineering philosophies. Now publicly misaligned before the first race. Meanwhile, emergency measures are already underway. 24-hour dyno testing in Sakura. Restricted airflow simulations to replicate Aston's packaging. A new battery specification being rushed to Australia. Formal requests to widen the bodywork, sacrificing aerodynamic efficiency for cooling stability. But widening the car changes everything. It alters airflow to the diffuser. It increases drag. It compromises the very concept Newey built this machine around. And that is why he is furious. Because this was supposed to be a clean start to a new era. Instead, the AMR26 begins life in recovery mode. Preseason testing is over. There are no more private corrections. Australia will be the first public verdict. If the revised battery survives race distance, if harvesting stabilizes, if clipping disappears, the narrative softens. If not, this stops being early instability. It becomes a full-blown integration failure. And when one of the greatest designers in Formula 1 history is openly furious before the first race, it usually means the problem runs far deeper than anyone expected. But here is where this situation becomes even more dangerous. Because fury inside a team like Aston Martin does not stay contained for long. When Newey is frustrated, it is not emotional noise. It is a warning signal. He built the AMR26 around a razor-thin margin philosophy. Extreme efficiency. Ultra-compact rear packaging. Minimal cooling excess. Every surface sculpted with purpose. That approach only works if the power unit performs exactly as promised. No deviation. No surprises. But Bahrain was a surprise. And not a small one. The car was not just overheating. It was structurally compromised by a hybrid system that could not sustain recharge cycles. When the battery overheats and the software cuts harvesting, the entire energy model collapses. In 2026, that is catastrophic. Because electric deployment is not optional anymore. It is foundational. Without it, you are not slightly slower. You are massively exposed. Now think about what that means for development direction. If Aston Martin widens the bodywork to give Honda more cooling headroom, the airflow to the rear changes. Diffuser efficiency drops. Drag increases. Balance shifts. Every aerodynamic map Newey refined becomes less precise. And that is before we even consider vibration. Because when electric deployment disappears, the combustion engine must compensate. Running in non-optimal rev ranges. Generating harmonic resonance. Putting stress on gearbox mounts. Damaging sensors. That is not a sustainable solution. It is survival mode. And survival mode is not how championship cars are built. Meanwhile, Honda is in crisis control. Public apology. Admission that simulations did not match real track conditions. 24-hour dyno programs. New battery specification under emergency production. Requests to widen the chassis. They are working around the clock. But time is the one variable nobody controls. The first race will not wait. And if Australia reveals even partial clipping under race stress, the pressure multiplies instantly. Because then the narrative becomes simple. New era. New investment. Newey on board. And still 4 seconds down. Fernando Alonso already looks uneasy. He has seen this movie before. Ambitious project. Big promises. Early overheating. Public frustration. He knows how quickly a season can slip away when the foundation is unstable. And here is the deeper issue. In a regulation reset year, the first months define everything. Wind tunnel direction. Software calibration baselines. Upgrade philosophy. If those foundations are built around a compromised engine package, the distortion carries forward. You end up chasing fixes instead of chasing performance. And that is what terrifies teams more than raw pace deficit. Because pace can be found. Structural misalignment is harder. So when we say Newey is furious, it is not drama. It is recognition. Recognition that the AMR26 was designed to attack from day one. Instead, it must defend its own reliability. Preseason testing is finished. There is no more private experimentation. Melbourne will expose the truth in full race conditions. If the revised battery holds temperature. If harvesting stabilizes across long runs. If clipping disappears. The crisis narrative fades. But if the car fades halfway down the straight again. If emergency cooling is still visible. If Alonso is managing temperatures instead of pushing. Then the anger becomes something bigger. Because in Formula 1, ambition without execution becomes vulnerability. And right now, Aston Martin's biggest vulnerability is the very component that was supposed to power its revolution. When the lights go out in Australia, we will find out whether this was a brutal wake-up call. Or the beginning of a technical storm that even Adrian Newey cannot control. And there is one final consequence that nobody inside Aston Martin wants to confront yet. Because if this engine struggle is not fully resolved in the first phase of the season, it changes the power dynamic of the entire project. When a team hires Adrian Newey, it is not for incremental gains. It is for immediate competitive authority. His presence shifts internal gravity. Design philosophy becomes sharper. Decisions become bolder. Confidence rises. But confidence depends on control. Right now, control is missing. If Honda's revised battery stabilizes the thermal runaway but limits peak deployment to protect reliability, the AMR26 may become consistent, but capped. If Newey refuses to fully abandon his extreme packaging concept, cooling headroom remains fragile. That tension cannot coexist forever. At some point, one philosophy must yield. And that is where political pressure begins. Lawrence Stroll invested in this partnership expecting a leap forward, not a learning curve. If early races confirm that Aston Martin is fighting just to escape the lower midfield, conversations shift from engineering to accountability. Questions become sharper. Timelines become tighter. And urgency becomes aggressive. Meanwhile, rivals are not standing still. While Aston Martin runs 24-hour dyno programs to validate battery durability under restricted airflow, other teams refine energy deployment maps. They optimize harvesting windows. They improve drag efficiency. They build momentum. Momentum is everything in a regulation reset year. The team that finds stability first builds confidence. Confidence accelerates development. Development compounds advantage. If Aston Martin spends the first 5 races stabilizing rather than attacking, the gap may stretch beyond immediate recovery. Fernando Alonso understands this instinctively. He does not fear a bad weekend. He fears a bad trajectory. When he says the car does not run properly, he is not venting. He is diagnosing. He knows that 4 seconds per lap is not a setup tweak. It is a foundation crack. And foundation cracks demand reconstruction, not patchwork. Honda's public transparency is admirable. They admitted simulation mismatch. They admitted abnormal thermal behavior in the energy store. They mobilized around-the-clock testing. They requested aerodynamic compromise for cooling stability. That is responsibility. But responsibility does not erase lost time. And lost time in Formula One is unforgiving. So as Australia approaches, the real tension is not about whether the AMR26 will be fastest. It is about whether it will be stable. Whether the battery will hold charge through consecutive braking zones. Whether the clipping disappears down the straight. Whether Alonso can push without being told to cool the system every second lap. If those answers are positive, this becomes an early scare that forged resilience. If they are negative, this becomes something else entirely. A warning that the integration between one of the greatest chassis designers in history and one of the most powerful engine manufacturers in the sport was never fully aligned. And when alignment fails at the start of a new era, recovery is possible. But rarely immediate. Preseason testing is over. The garage doors will open in Melbourne under the full weight of expectation. And when the cars hit full throttle for the first time in race conditions, we will discover whether Newey's fury was the spark that forced correction. Or the first signal that Aston Martin's bold revolution began with a flaw too deep to hide.